Hey everyone, welcome. Today we are diving into a really fascinating piece of tech history that you've probably never heard of, Windows Refund Day. And I want to kick things off by mentioning that this entire explainer is grounded in the incredibly detailed research of engineer Abdul Rahman Mahmood. He's a principal IT and security consultant and also the author of the Alpha Peeler crypto tool, which you might know. His work, all based on authentic sources, gives us this amazing window into a truly unique protest. So picture this. You see a sign just like this one. Now, this isn't some anti-technology protest. No, this is a group of computer enthusiasts, really tech-savvy users, and some of the very first open-source advocates. And they're all gathered right outside the offices of one of the biggest companies on the entire planet. The year is 1999, and they have just had it with paying for something they have zero intention of ever using. So what on earth was going on here? I mean, this wasn't some massive march on Washington, but it was, in its own way, a pretty huge moment for software and for consumer rights. What would drive these users to actually take a day off work, make signs, and go demand their money back? Well, the answer really pulls back the curtain on a major power struggle from the early days of the PC.
And that brings us right to the heart of the issue, a frustration so widespread it even had its own nickname, the Windows tax. This was the whole reason for the protests, and it's just a perfect example of how a company's dominance in the market can directly affect regular people.
You see, back then, Microsoft Windows was an absolute king. If you went to buy a computer from Dell or Compaq, or really any major brand, it was going to come with Windows 95 or 98. Now, for the average person, that was totally fine. But for this growing community of people using other operating systems like Linux, it might they were being forced to buy a Windows license just to get the computer hardware.
So these protesters, they found a little legal loophole, and it was buried deep in the fine print of the Windows end-user license agreement. You know, that giant wall of text that we all just scroll through and click agree on without reading. Well, inside that EULA, there was a clause, and it basically said that if you don't agree to the terms, you're actually entitled to a refund. Sounds simple, right? Well, not so fast.
This created this absolutely maddening situation, a real catch-22. So you'd go buy your brand new computer, you'd turn it on, and the very first thing you'd see is the Windows EULA. You'd reject it, which was your right, then you'd call up the manufacturer, the OEM, to ask for your refund, and they'd almost always say no, which left you stuck, paying for a product you legally rejected and were just about to wipe off the machine anyway. Well, eventually, people just got tired of being stuck in that loop. That frustration started to turn into action. What were once just isolated complaints started to merge into a real organized movement, all thanks to the early power of the internet.
You know, every movement needs a hero, or at the very least a proof of concept. And stories started to trickle out through online forums about people who had actually won this fight. One of the most famous cases was a guy named Jeffrey Bennett, a Linux user down in Australia, who successfully argued his case and got a refund from Toshiba. This was huge because it proved it wasn't impossible. It was just really, really hard.
And this really puts into perspective what was at stake. It was never about getting rich. It was all about the principle of the thing. But getting that $110 check in the mail, that made the fight feel real. It was a tangible amount of money for a real license, and it gave a ton of other people hope. So you can literally see the momentum building here. What started as just these individual little victories in early '98, that led to actual coordinated discussions on Linux user groups later that year. And by January of '99, organizers put out a formal call to action, setting one single unified day for everybody to demand their refunds all at once.
And that brings us to the day itself. All that online chatter, all the planning, all the shared frustration, it all came to a head in a physical demonstration aimed right at the heart of the tech industry.
The epicenter of the whole thing was, pretty fittingly, right in Silicon Valley. Protesters targeted Microsoft's regional office in Foster City, California. They wanted to make sure their message would be heard where it mattered the most.
Okay, so it wasn't a massive crowd. About 100 dedicated people showed up, and they first gathered in a nearby Denny's parking lot, which is just a wonderfully normal start to a tech protest, before they marched over to the Microsoft campus, armed with their unused Windows software and a very clear message. Their signs, they got straight to the point. They used slogans like pro-choice, which was really clever because it framed the whole issue as one of consumer freedom, not just some nerdy technical complaint. And of course, you had Tux, the beloved Linux Penguin mascot, right there, symbolizing the free, open-source alternative they were all fighting for.
So when they actually tried to go up and deliver their refund requests directly to the executives on the 9th floor, they were met with a very, very corporate response. locked elevators, and security guards. A few Microsoft reps did come down, but they came bearing refreshments, not refund checks. And this, of course, led to the inevitable corporate standoff. The protesters had a super clear demand, and it was based on Microsoft's own legal agreement. But the company and the computer manufacturers, well, they had a very different story.
And here it is, that catch-22 in its final, perfect form. Microsoft's public stance was, hey, refunds are the manufacturer's job. But then when you'd contact the manufacturers, they'd say, well, we can't give you a refund because Microsoft won't refund us for the license. It was this perfect loop of finger-pointing that left the actual customer completely stuck in the middle.
So if nobody actually got a refund that day, was the whole thing a failure? Absolutely not. See, the true value of Windows Refund Day wasn't in the cash they didn't get, but in the attention that they did. The immediate result was a massive public relations victory. The story got picked up by major news outlets all over the world. And for the very first time, this really niche issue of software bundling and the Windows tax was being talked about by a mainstream audience. They had successfully sounded the alarm.
And this, right here, is the real takeaway. That protest became a legendary moment for the open source community, a real symbol of grassroots activism. It shined a huge spotlight on the fundamental philosophical divide between closed, proprietary software and the open, free software movement. And maybe most importantly, it forced a conversation about consumer rights that went on for years, and it eventually helped create a market where buying a computer without an OS became a real option.
And that brings us right back to today. I mean, 1999 seems like a lifetime ago, but the core issue, it doesn't, does it? Think about all the pre-installed apps on your phone you can't delete, or the bundled software on a new laptop, or the subscriptions that get rolled into a service you barely even use. The technology has changed, for sure, but that question those protesters asked all those years ago is just as relevant as ever. Are we really in control of what we pay for?